think we're going to get started. I hope that between the temperature and the carbs we can make it through this, but I'm going to try. So just to introduce myself, I'm Julienne Hadley, and I work as a project manager or senior digital producer on the user experience and digital strategy team. And today I'm presenting with Adriana Corona, who's our senior experience designer. And we've kind of come at this topic from two different angles, me being someone who helps our clients through a project, and Adriana, who really understands usability and user experience side of why content strategy is important. So I think hopefully you'll get our mixed perspectives on this one. So, oops.
Oh, you can just, sorry, that's tracking my time.
Oh, okay. So let's start off with a question, why bother with content strategy? You may at times feel like this person who's kind of overwhelmed by a lot of content on your website, who maybe needs a life preserver or some help to kind of sift through that and understand how to better manage your content. And, you know, there are a lot of reasons why content strategy can help you, but I think there are a couple that I'd like to focus on for this community. And that is that we want to help you do less, not more. And that's something we'll be repeating. More content does not equal more engagement. And we really want to help you find ways and tactics to kind of pare down what you have and make sure that you make the most of it. Another reason content strategy is really important is that it gives you the highest return on your time invested. So you're really going to do a better job at reaching your target audience, establishing a realistic, sustainable, and manageable plan, really reducing redundant or extraneous efforts that you might be making on your site, aligning your content across all channels, whether that be social media, e-marketing, website. You have a lot of content and a lot of channels now to manage, so this is one way of kind of getting a better sense of how to handle that. And finally, preventing projects from being derailed or delayed. I think when you have a plan in place, you can really try to manage that a little more strategically. So today we'll walk you through the following steps on how to create your content strategy. Obviously in an hour we'll try to tackle as much as possible, but and we'll be digging deeper a little bit later at a working session. But we'll focus first on the importance of goal setting. This is really a critical step in your content strategy. It really helps you understand where you're headed and also helps you set boundaries with your colleagues. So, you know, that concept of more does not equal more is really something that we hope to focus on and to kind of help you communicate back to your colleagues. Next, we'll talk about prioritizing content and taking action. So in your prioritization, you'll need to conduct an audit and kind of get a stock of what you have in order to get a sense of what your priorities are and how to act on that content. We'll be talking about a couple different methods for auditing, which include quantitative and qualitative audits, and why it's important to make that final decision at the end, you know, whether you keep, create, unpublish, any number of steps to make decisions about how to move forward with your content. Then we'll be discussing creating purposeful content. Through that audit, you may discover that there are some content gaps, and so this is where you would want to create some new content that helps kind of fill a gap that you've identified through that process. And then, of course, very importantly, planning for ongoing site maintenance and measuring whether your content is performing. So once you go through that process of paring things down, you really want to keep checking to see if the content is performing well. So at the very end, we'll open the floor up for questions. I know that sometimes, you know, if you have a burning question you have to ask in the middle, feel free, but ideally we would kind of tackle all those things towards the end. Okay.
So first I'd like to ask if you can all hear me because I have a soft voice. Great. So I want to talk to you about the importance of setting goals, but basically you can't get to where you want to be if you don't know where you're headed. And it's really important to define first, before you start your website project, where is it that I want to be heading? Why is that important? This is something that I think should hit home with a lot of people here, but you have a mission, and it is not to have a website. The goal of your project should not be to have a web presence. Your organization has its own objectives, and your website is actually just a tool for you to accomplish your organizational goals and to meet the needs of your audience. So what we want to convince you of is that really successful content either fulfills some kind of audience need or it supports a key organizational goal, and preferably it does both of those things. When this glorious piece of content does both, we call it core content, and we're going to start talking more to you about core content. But this is kind of the Venn diagram of what, imagining your content space. You have a lot of needs that your audience wants to accomplish on your website. You have a lot of goals that you've set for your organization. Maybe one of your goals is increase donations to my organization. And then you have the intersection of core content. One thing that I want to mention, and it's really core to the belief of our team, the User Experience and Digital Strategy team, is that audience needs are more important. And that's hard to hear, but hear me out. We really firmly believe that the most important aspect of the success of any product, whether it be a website or a doorknob, is the value that it provides to its intended audience. So when I say the secret is in between the audience needs and your business goals, always keep in mind that we favor audience needs. Whenever you have a decision to make, whether you ran out of time or you don't have enough resources to create the additional content, and you're at this point where you have to say, will I expend effort fulfilling the needs of my audience or fulfilling an organizational goal? Always go with your audience, because you cannot go wrong. So, how do you actually discover goals? This is a very meaty topic. I'm going to tell you a 6-step process without any details, and I'll tell you why later. So the first thing is, review the Yale imprint. So I'm assuming that everyone in this room is associated with Yale University, and if not, forgive me for this first point. But we have the luxury of being a part of an established university that has an identity and has a mission and has an imprint. So if you actually can get a copy of the Yale imprint, does everyone know what it is? Some people know, some people may not. If you don't, reach out to us afterwards. But it's basically a document that outlines how Yale perceives itself, its core goals, especially in terms of communication. So it's really important to read this. You'll get a head start. If you read this imprint, you already have a head start in figuring out how do you want to position your organization. Because no matter what, it should align with Yale's organizational vision, whatever it is that you're doing. Secondly, you should interview your stakeholders, and what we mean by stakeholders is the leadership of your organization, the people who make decisions, the people who are well informed about your audience. So if your audience is prospective students, you should be interviewing the person who's in charge of the admissions process. Interview your audience members. And this is something that I'm going to repeat over and over. So it's going to sound like a broken record, but if there's one thing you remember, focus on your audience. The best way to have a good product is to involve the people who are going to use it. So we'll repeat it again, don't worry if you forget. Then start with core content. I mentioned earlier there's a subset of content that's like the holy grail. It accomplishes a lot of your needs, and you should really put most of your effort in making that content excellent, and then start working on the rest. And then validate with your audience. When I say validate with your audience, I mean conduct research with your users. We do this in our team every third Thursday. We have user research sessions where we test people's websites and we see, are you meeting your objectives? Is it usable? Can people find what they're looking for? And that's the last I'll say. I know that that is a very rough outline, but how to discover your goals was the topic of my talk at Drupal Camp last year for an hour. So if you really want help with this, what we call the discovery process, I urge you to go to last year's sessions. It was recorded, and look at the talk about discovering your website goals. That's all we can say about it now. We're going to have a workshop later if anyone else is interested, and I don't know what my goals are. And this slideshow will also be posted. So I just talked to you in a 6-point plan about the ideal world. You're setting your goals, you know your mission, we outline the objectives, we have an action plan, we're setting this in motion. But now let's talk about a little bit about reality, because from what we know about people we work here, who work at Yale, is that we do a lot of things at once. We don't just have a website, we have a lot of other things going on. So without strategic goals, what do? In the absence of strategic goals, surprise, focus on your audience. So let's say you can't interview your audience. You don't have time to interview your audience. You don't have time to conduct user research and validate your plans. Think, what do users email you about? Are you receiving a lot of emails about something that could be on your website and it's just unclear? Think again, what information is critical to serving the needs of your audience? So if your audience is prospective students, try to put yourself in their shoes and think, go through the process of what would I need to know if I wanted to apply to this place. It's really important that you focus on your users, especially in the absence of any strategic goals. And we have some templates. These templates we're going to post on the Drupal site. We're also going to demonstrate them in our working session at 3 p.m. in room 102. So basically, we talk about your audience and organizational goals, and we also help you create a content plan. A content plan is basically writing down the subset of content that either in the Venn diagram meets an audience need. So for example, how do I apply to Yale? That's meeting an audience need. Or meets an organizational goal. One example is giving to Yale. We help you plan out that content in a spreadsheet and really define who your audience is, what they need, and what your goals are. And that's just the first step, because there's another reality check now. What's the second reality check? The second reality check is that I gave you a very clean picture of a Venn diagram with 2 circles and said, all you need to do to be successful is focus on these 2 circles and you're ready to go. But this is great if you're making a website for the first time. Julienne and I were lucky enough to be able to do that twice this year because we launched 2 new websites that they didn't exist. But if any of you here already have a website, whether it's a redesign or you're just reworking parts of your website, just specific sections, this is actually what you're up against. Content at the top is what I was discussing before, the needs of your audience and your organizational goals, and then this mammoth, which is your existing content. And as we already mentioned earlier, our objective is to make you do less and not more. So it's really clear if you find yourself in this situation, this is something I really want to hit home. Your existing content is both more than you need, way more than you need, and it's not enough to fulfill the needs of your audience and your organizational goals. So the whole point of this presentation that we're giving you, you're going to see this Venn diagram over and over and over. We're going to try to help you plan for successful content and then help you plan for maintaining the success of that content. So how do you plan for success? Julienne is going to talk to you about prioritizing and acting on those priorities.
All right, so now that you've established your goals, or if you haven't, you have a good sense of how to think about your audience and what they need, it's time to take stock of what you have and perform a content audit. An audit will really help you assess and prioritize whether your content meets an audience need or an organizational goal, and if not, which action to take. And we're kind of recommending one of 4 actions, whether that be to delete or /unpublish. Delete is kind of a scary term in the web world. Revise, keep, or create new purposeful content for your website. So a quantitative audit is really just a way of taking stock of everything that you have. We have developed a spreadsheet that will be, much more condensed. I mean, you can go deep into these things. But what we're kind of focusing on is things like URLs, content types, the status of that page, whether that be, when it was last published, analytical information if you're tracking analytics on your site, hopefully you are. And now that you've determined the scope of that content, it's time to conduct a qualitative audit, which will help you evaluate the quality of that content. So this is where you're going to measure what you have against your strategic goals. The spreadsheet will look something like this in terms of the section of it that relates to quantitative data. And again, this can be very shallow or deep, really depends on the time and resources that you have. The spreadsheet that we created is really designed for people at Yale who probably have limited time and resources to do this. And we recommend that you kind of refine this spreadsheet. So when you receive it and you have a sense of what your goals are, you may have different categories that you want to capture or different information that's relevant specifically to you. So obviously modify this to your own needs. But as a reminder, this will be posted, so don't worry. And the data we're looking at here, you can see, when was it last updated? What's the status? Who's the author and owner? So this is an important part of the qualitative audit process, is capturing the governance information. When you download this information or capture this information from your website, even though the person who authored that content on the website may be Jane Doe, you may know that the real author is someone else. And so this is one way of capturing that information and maybe hopefully creating an editorial committee that you can kind of be more dependent on to help you with this content creation. Let's see, do I have anything more to say about that? A qualitative audit is, now that you've taken stock of what you have, a qualitative audit's really about judging the quality of what you have. So it really helps you assess, the accuracy of your existing content, the quality of your images and text formatting, which audience the content was intended to serve, and whether you're meeting that goal, which organizational goal that content is intended to meet or to achieve, and whether that is being met. And so this audit really helps you make decisions about how to act. Between the quantitative and the qualitative data, you're ready to go ahead and approach this first column here, which is the action. So this spreadsheet that we put together recommends these one of four things I mentioned earlier: unpublish, keep, create, or revise. So let's just walk through how would you make this decision about each of these things. Let's talk about that a little more. So this may be obvious, but if you have no audience defined for your content, if the content's outdated or inaccurate, if it's poor quality, and by poor quality we mean the image quality is maybe not consistent with the other images on your site, maybe every image on your site's professionally taken and someone chose an upload of an iPhone image, or let's say that the formatting is really dense. Maybe you have lots and lots of data on your page, and you know that that's not great for writing for the web. So these are things that you would assess and you would rate in terms of the quality. Maybe it doesn't meet an organizational goal. And most importantly, maybe it's unpopular with your audience. The analytics are telling you nobody's visiting this page. All of these things being said, unpublish. This is an area that you just want to weed out right from the start with your audit. If, let's say, that you do have a defined audience, it serves an audience need, it meets an organizational goal, and it's really popular with your audience. But maybe the content's inaccurate or out of date, and maybe the quality of some of the content is not great. This isn't a contender for revision. You really want to think about keeping this data. Obviously, your audience needs it. It just needs some work. If all of these things are met, this is great content. This is core content. It's meeting your audience needs, meeting your organizational goal. Quality is great. This is probably the most important data on your website, content on your website. So obviously, it's a contender to keep. And one of the most interesting, maybe, outcomes of this audit process might be that you identify a content gap. Maybe through this process you realize, oh, our website doesn't say something important that it needs to say, that we know meets an audience need, that we know meets an organizational goal. And that's an area that you would want to flag to create some new purposeful content. So I think Adriana's going to talk a little more about that, how to create purposeful content.
So the good news is, by this point, we got rid of what some people call the rot, which is all of that content that's just dragging you down. At this point, you should have, erased it, unpublished it. It's kind of crossed out in our Venn diagram. You also already identified the quality content that you're going to keep. That's great. And now it's time to start thinking, what are the unmet needs? So where's the gap in the content that I identified by defining my goals and understanding my audience? What is it that they want that we're not giving them? So two things I'll say, and you've already heard this. One is every piece of content needs a job. So if it's not fulfilling an organizational goal or an audience need, unpublish it. It hurts, especially if you wrote the content yourself. It hurts to check on publish on like 10 pieces of information, but just think of the catharsis. Think of next time when you have to revise, how easy it's going to be because you reduce your content by 60%. So really keep thinking about that. It must serve a goal. If it doesn't have a job, it shouldn't be on your site. Unless analytics say it's really, really popular, then keep that. So preferably both things. So let's talk a little bit about core pages and how we design for them. So core pages are the kind that I mentioned earlier. They fulfill multiple goals. And they also allow you to go from a space where you're fulfilling an audience need to sending them to fulfill an organizational goal. So if you, on a page, fulfill the needs of your audience, they came here for this one page, and they're happy that they succeeded, then you have a better chance if your organizational goal is to increase, opportunities for giving to a particular school. You have that opening, you have that chance of saying, before you leave, why don't you consider these other things? So that's what core pages allow you to do. You should identify some pages like these in your content plan, and then meet the needs of your audience first before you think of yourself. Make sure that that content meets their needs, and then think about opportunities for meeting your own goals. We call this the core model. It's something that we use when we're planning new content templates. This goes into a lot of detail, and you probably can't see from far away. But I'm just going to, in summary, say, after defining business goals and key user needs, we design a single page to meet those needs. We define inward paths, so we say, how are people even arriving here? Did you send an email to them? Did they see a flyer? Did they Google? Was this a Facebook ad? This is something you really have to think and plan for. How do you even acquire people to go to your site? And then once they're there, what do they need? Am I sure that I gave them what they needed? And then look for opportunities for forward paths. And the forward paths are, what do I want this user to do or think or feel at this point now that they've completed their own goal? Usually we go with a core model on a mobile device, so this is kind of like a mocked-up version of a mobile device. The reason we do this is because going on a very small screen as a start, even for sketching, forces you to prioritize your content. So what fits on a mobile device, obviously, is less than what fits on a giant screen at once, right? So by constraining yourself to that screen, you're forced to prioritize, and that's really important when you're making good content. So we're going to post this. I don't have more to say about that now. If you come to our workshop, we may be able to talk about it. And there's a really good article about the core model on a list apart that I would recommend everybody read, especially if you're starting to think about a redesign or if you have a lot of stakeholders involved. And you can just Google a list apart core model, and it should be the first result. And one final thing. This is kind of at a micro level. It's not as much to do with strategy, but it's important to know that writing for the web is different than writing for print. The type of text that you use, we use more linking, more bullets, shorter sentences, less prose. We have got a guide for you for writing for the web. I'm not going to read it all here, but we'll also post this. And I highly recommend that you read through this just to see, is the page content that I'm putting out there really suited for this medium? And measuring performance now. We talked about creating content. So now, at this point, you're kind of in good shape. You removed what you didn't need. You created at least a plan for new content. And now we have to make sure that it's successful. So how do you actually measure whether something is successful? For each organizational goal, you should think to yourself, what action do I want the user to take at this point if they're already on my site? And how would I rate success in that? If the action is donate more to the school, you rate success by donation amount. For each audience need, what does it mean for a user to be successful at their own objective? It's not what you want the user to do, it's what they came to your site to accomplish. And how would you measure this? These are things you have to ask yourself, so let's go through some examples. For the organizational goal of, say, I want to have more alumni attend events. what are the types of things that you could answer here? So what action do you want a user to take? One of the possible actions is visit your website. How would you rate success? If you define the action as visit my website or a part of my website, success in this case would be page views on the site or that section of the site. I want to convince you that this is not a good approach. The reason that this is not a good approach goes back to the very first statements we were making about how you have a mission and it's not to have a website. Your mission should just be supporting your goals that may live outside of, the web space. It lives in the real world with real humans. So let's try to reconfigure this goal. If your goal is to have more alumni attend events, what kind of action do you want them to take? The action in the real world is maybe attend one event per year. If they're already attending one event per year, maybe the action be attend more events, more than one event per year. And then the measurement for success here has shifted. Not only do you track the page views to the site, but you may also track who RSVP'd. And then, of course, you should track attendance at events. And these are the types of things that really focusing on the outcome, it's going to help you have a stronger website because you're focused on the goal instead of what do I want people to do on my website. And you have to really start thinking in this way. It's also nice to see, do increased page views on this events page actually correlate with higher attendance? That's some good evidence that your website's being successful at helping you with that. And the other thing I'll say, in the original version, I said, what action do I want them to take? And the action was visit my site. Keep in mind that your website is not the only way you communicate with people. If you have poor attendance at alumni events, and you think the solution is, I'm going to put up a page on my website and assume that people will miraculously end up there because they're really interested in alumni events, that may be a bad strategy. And the reason that may be a bad strategy is that they may not be attending because they haven't had, if they had already thought, I really want to attend events and looked for it, they would have found a way to find you. So you have to think about a larger strategy of other channels, like, am I emailing them? Do they get do alumni actually get a newsletter from us? Am I promoting this event in other avenues? And your website is not your only way of accomplishing your goals. Just one more example for an audience need. If you imagine that an audience member is a student, and they may say, you have a dining hall website, and they may say, what is today's dining hall menu? Think to yourself, what does it mean for your user to be successful? So if they're successful, this one's pretty straightforward. I think to myself, what's the menu? And I find the menu for my college. I'm in JE, I find it. Success. How do you measure this? We actually ran sessions like this in room 102 throughout the day, but basically you can run usability sessions. Usability sessions is when you invite participants to test your site and you give them a task. So I would invite Julienne and I would say, hi Julienne, would you mind? Can you just show me how you would find today's menu? And then you just watch them do it. If they succeed, it's great. They succeeded, this is awesome. If they succeed and it was easy, that means your site is usable. And if they don't succeed, that's the best way to see where you're going wrong. If you labeled something wrong, if the menu's hard to find, if it's in the wrong section of the site. That's the last thing I'll say, except to mention that there's a website that we just posted, usability.yale.edu, that gives you guidance on running your own usability tests and on other usability issues. And the last thing I'll mention, in this scenario, we said a student wants to know today's menu. The first thing they need for success in this is for the content to exist on your site. So it seems very straightforward, but think about these things. So if it's not on your site and it's not prioritized there, they're failing from the beginning. So these are the types of things you want to think about when you're prioritizing your content planning. So far, you identified your audience, you set goals, you created a content plan, which is basically deciding what content you need to accomplish those goals. You did a content audit, so you understood the mammoth that was your existing content and decided what action to take on each of them. So you unpublished, revised, kept, and created new content. You decided how you want to measure your performance. And now it's time to keep up the good hygiene. So the good thing about content strategy is that having a good one will help you be successful ongoing. This is not a one-time thing. So let's talk about planning for maintenance. If you're launching a new site, is anyone launching a very brand new site? Doesn't exist, is not a redesign? One person. Awesome. So congratulations on the day of site launch. You are now a publisher. A lot of people have this misconception that like the project is actually moving towards the launch date, and then there's a launch date and you have a huge party, but actually that's just the beginning. Launch day is day one, and content strategy is about what happens from day two forward. So one thing I want to remind people of is don't suffer from what we're calling launch and forget syndrome. If you suffer from launch and forget syndrome, you'll be in the state that a lot of us find ourselves in, which is you already have a site and you don't want this to happen again. So the hard work is in cleaning up this. I'm going to call it a mess only because existing content doesn't match your actual needs. But once you've done that once, the maintenance of these routine content hygiene tasks is so much easier, and it's just refreshing. So to maintain a good content hygiene, you just have to react to evidence. So hopefully you defined what success means to you, and you've looked around and seen, has my site worked or not in helping me accomplish these goals? So based on your results in the real world, you can make decisions. Maybe you need to update audience needs. Maybe you never realized that people were looking for this particular thing on your site, but now you know. So just update your content plan. Maybe you need to reorganize, the organizational goals. Maybe you accomplished it. So one great thing is you're tracking your organizational goals. You realize we met our goal. So set a new goal for the next year. And that's why you would revise your content plan. And then priorities and actions also need to be revised continuously. Once you do this once, the maintenance of it is much easier than the first lift. And just to mention, I think this is your section. Julienne's going to talk about holding yourself accountable.
So, you've gone through the steps of looking at what you have, doing all of the analysis, but part of, as Adriana mentioned, part of content strategy is thinking ahead what happens on day two. And so we really think that it's a good idea for you to kind of establish an editorial calendar and really think ahead on, planning for future site updates, establishing site governance, who's going to create this content, who's going to publish this content, who's going to help you. This is a big effort and usually not the only job someone has. And just ensuring that all of the necessary channels to communicate with your audience are identified. So as Adriana mentioned, the website's just one of many tools. You have e-marketing, you have social media. What are the different channels you want to use to communicate this message? Maybe the website's one of the places that you're driving traffic to because you want people to donate or whatever. But you need to communicate that message and reach your audience in different ways. The website is something that people have to self-select to come and visit. It's not something they will necessarily know right from the get-go. So establishing an editorial calendar is really a way to hold yourself accountable. We recommend that, once you establish this calendar, you share it with your fellow editors and publishers, but also that you set reminders. So this is one way of you lay out the plan for the year, or 6 months or 3 months, as far ahead as you can plan. You share this with the people who are helping you. But ultimately, a lot of the time, it's the communications team or the web team's responsibility to really make sure that this content, that this is happening. So this is the plan, and you may share this with other people, but ultimately, someone has to kind of be responsible for making sure that things are going forward on time and as planned. So you can. This is the plan, but you can also set reminders for how to manage this content. There are a couple different ways to do that. You could be, one of our clients is using Outlook calendars, calendar reminders to, say, okay, I know on February 2nd I need to message about X. But there are also other ways of doing this through Drupal, which is one of the things we'll be demonstrating at the workshop. And so, establishing this plan, setting reminders, those are ways of kind of making sure that as you go forward, your site content is really up to date and that you're accountable for making sure it's fresh. So Today we've kind of talked about some different tactics for setting a content strategy, and we have a bunch of templates and tools we want to post on the Drupal Camp website for you to access. I know that we went through this rather quickly, but the worksheets that we put together this one worksheet which has many tabs. And so you sort of identify your audience and organizational goals on the first tab. You establish your content plan on the next tab, which kind of helps you determine the frequency of updating. So let's say you identify a particular part of, type of content, and you know that semesterally or annually this content needs to be updated. Those are where your decisions are made in your content plan. And then you conduct an audit to kind of assess what to keep, what to get rid of, the quality of that content. It gives you action steps to take to kind of pare down and do less, not more. Then you will also be thinking ahead and putting together your editorial calendar, which is another tab on the same worksheet. So we're hoping we can make this really simple for you so that you have the tools to kind of get a better sense of things on your website. And hopefully assign roles and identify editors to help you with this, because this is obviously a big task. So just to reiterate, in our next meeting or session, we will be talking about copying a list of that content from your Drupal site into the audit template, kind of how to establish that content plan and editorial calendar, which will basically just be walking through an example of how to do that on the template. And also, Adriana's put together some steps for enabling a Drupal module, or actually it's more like rules and triggers to kind of remind you to update content. And at this point, we invite any questions, and feel free to contact us at ux@yale.edu or visit one of our two websites that we have. Our usability.yale.edu website was referenced maybe a few times throughout this presentation. That website has a lot of sort of DIY type resources that you can use, including usability testing. And also our UX digital strategy site is our website where we have some information about consultations we offer, like the ones that Adriana mentioned, and also other web services. So, do we have any questions? Is everyone tired? Yeah. Does everyone think that they might benefit from using some of these templates? Has anyone, yeah? Okay, good. Has anyone conducted an audit before of their content? Okay. I think it's a great exercise. It's really, really hard to mentally keep in mind all of the things that you have on your site, and it's really a great tool to talk with your leadership about the content that you have. And when new requests come in, it helps you kind of direct that conversation, talk about your organizational needs, or goals and needs. Yes?
What are the roles that you would say are the most crucial in order to implement this content strategy, particularly if you have a small team?
The rules or the roles?
The roles.
The roles. So in terms of like editors and publishers and that kind of thing, my opinion is you're going to want to have someone who owns, so for instance, in my former life at the Yale Center for British Art, when I managed their site, we had people who were, say, in the education department or in the paintings department, and they knew their content best. So you're going to need some partnership with those people as editors to write some of the content that you need. But then you need an owner, a publisher, someone whose job is to make sure that the tone and voice are consistent, that the content's written well for the web, that the images are formatted in the way that are consistent with the rest of your site. So I think there has to be at least one partner who really knows the content and one partner who really understands how to keep the communications consistent. There are sometimes many other layers that some organizations need for various reasons, but probably at the bare bones, those would be the two roles, I would say. Yes?
As well as any recommendations for applications to doing things like heat mapping behaviors, eye tracking.
Great. So you have one resource available at Yale. Every third Thursday we conduct user research. So if you have a website and you want to see, is it accomplishing my goals for users, you can submit that to us. So we host it, and then we write a report for you and we tell you what's working and what's not. We also have instructions for running your own usability testing on our website in case you want to do it yourself, or you think this is something that you need more frequently than once a month, or because we're first come first serve, sometimes we'll say, we're booked for November, so can you wait till the summer? So we have some self-help tutorials on how to run your own tests. We also conduct other types of studies, not just usability testing. So if you were to reach out to us, we could try to figure out what's best for your needs. About, more quantitative tools like heat mapping, scroll maps, everything like that, I have some tools that I have used. That's not something I've posted on any website or written up a recommendation about, but if you feel like it'd be useful, that's something we can also, write up and post somewhere. Just, recommendations for different tools. We have like a tool set that we use, but it'd be nice to share that with people too. Is that good? Awesome.
Any other questions today? Yes.
Do you find that when you're talking to places or departments at Yale about the content writing, that a lot of the individual departments come to roadblocks after you in the leadership, and that they may not want to get rid of or publish things that the leadership happens to be useful, and then either your team or the department together speaking has to follow your
Yeah, I know. There's a whole political, bureaucratic side of this, and I think, when you're a communications person or a web person, this is easy to sell. We all believe this to be true, but there are people out there who believe that their content is really important, and it doesn't matter if it meets an audience need. I think there's a lot of socialization that needs to happen about how to get people on board with this idea. I think when you come to people in leadership with an editorial calendar and an audit, and you can really kind of provide insight into, here's the performance of this content. I mean, there's some things you can't argue with. You can't argue with analytics, I mean, there may be a reason why someone's not visiting that page, and it may be because the content's not well written, or, there's something wrong with the content, and maybe it does meet an audience need. It's just not well visited. But I think sometimes it comes down to, depending on the person, what will be most convincing to them. Is it that the analytics aren't performing well? So maybe to say, if you think this is really important and we want to work on revising this content to make this really useful for the audience, how can we do that? Let's set some metrics so that we can work together to make that content more useful, and then check the metrics again in 6 months or whatever. So I think it kind of depends, and I think you can't ignore the fact that there are roadblocks that are sometimes unavoidable, but I think that through some strategic conversations about data points and, kind of meeting these audience needs and organizational goals, that's to the benefit of the person whose content it belongs to. You can kind of start there, and hopefully, I also think that, by having your data in this structured format and kind of helping to create some insights into that data would be really convincing. Sometimes you have these conversations without a lot of evidence or information, and so I think it's just a much stronger argument when you have all of that information. Do you have anything more to say about that?
So I know a lot of you actually have been in a situation where you're building websites for a team, and I wonder if anyone else in the audience has an answer to that question. So our model is we build websites for a lot of different groups, and we kind of are immersed in the politics of it while we're planning. But the maintenance is really up to the content maintainers, and by that point, we've kind of exited the projects, and now it's your baby, and you have to take care of it. So I wonder if anyone here has any insights about how you've handled, the politics of someone really wanting to keep a page that really is unnecessary.
Cone of silence.
I'll stop and record. Take it down.
Take it down.
Just take it down.
Yes.
Sort of approach it like, what makes it unnecessary? Is it that it's getting in the way? Is it that, sort of your site architecture allows the room for some what might look like superfluous content, but in fact that content does get looked at just 1/10 of the time of everything else. There might be reasons to include it. So it might not be such a high note, but it might come down to whether that content is being there in some way disimpeding the rest of the site.
And that's a really good point. One other way you could approach this, so the real problem is keeping this type of page around is really weighing down on the people who maintain the site. So the more you have, the more weight you're carrying around, especially if it doesn't meet any needs. But at the very least, if you can't win the battle for some of the pages that you have identified as unnecessary, you can at least at a micro level reduce the content on those pages. So at least from my experience, the unnecessary pages also seem to be the ones that are like 50 pages long in one page, like paragraph after paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. So at least you could urge the person who wants to keep it to prune it down. Maybe give them our worksheet on writing for the web. So if it's, if it's one paragraph to maintain, that's different than 5 pages to maintain. So even if you can't win ultimately, I don't think this page should be on here, you can at least, promote best practices for web content, and that's going to make your life easier anyway.
Well, if we have no other questions, please do join us at 3 p.m. if you have the time to talk a little more in depth about this, and we'll kind of walk through the worksheets with you. Thank you.